Hey guys, so we are going to be looking at more two-step equations today. Most of these are going to focus on when you have this negative coefficient with your x. So you're going to have your constant first in your equation. That's what the majority of these are going to focus on, which we have done that before when we did two-step equations on Monday. But we're going to really focus in on that because that's always a concern for students and somewhere where they mess up. So if we take a look at this, you're still going to follow your first time we draw that line down the equal sign. Sorry guys. And then we're going to look at what is the constant and how do we get rid of that. So remember, this negative goes with my 6x. So if you need to circle it, do that. You don't have to. But how would I get rid of that positive 7? Well, I would subtract 7. So I'm going to type in 31 minus 7, and that's 24. So we have a negative 6x equals 24. How do I, now notice how I brought that subtraction down as my negative with my 6x. I can't just forget about it. So now I'm dividing by a negative 6, so we get x equals negative 4. So to check my solution, I'm going to come up here and I'm going to put 7 minus 6 times negative 4. Does that give me 31? So when I type that in my calculator, I'm going to type in 7 minus 6 times, what was it, negative 4, enter. And I get 31. So I know I'm correct. So let's look down here at the practice. 10 minus d equals 19. Draw my line down the equal sign. And I'm going to first take a look at, this is a negative d. So I have a positive 10. So I subtract 10 here. So I have negative d equals 9. Now, how do I get rid of this negative? How do I undo that negative? So we remember, if there is no number, it's actually a negative 1. So how would I undo multiplying by a negative 1? I divide by negative 1. You have to show this step. You can't just put d equals negative 9. You got to show why it's negative 9, and that's because we're dividing by a negative 1. So if I take a look at number 2, draw my line down, and I'm going to start with subtracting 11 because it's a positive 11, so I subtract 11 from each side. So I have a negative 3g equals 21. And divide by a negative 3, and g equals negative 7. Remember, with each of these, type these back into the equation, put them back into the original equation, and make sure that it works. Number 3, you're going to draw your line down, and we're going to start with subtracting 12 from each side. I bring down that negative with my y, so negative 7y equals negative 14. I divide by a negative 7, so y equals a positive 2. I want you to go ahead and pause the video now. I want you to work 4, 5, and 6, and then when you come back, hit play and I'll have the answers back up for you. Okay, so you should have finished up 4, 5, and 6. Notice on number 4, you would start with subtracting 42 from both sides. We end up with a negative 36 equals 3y. We divide by a negative 3 to both sides. That was a negative 3y, excuse me, that's a negative right there. So we end up with 12 equals y. Number 5, we have a negative 8. So to get that to 0, we have to add 8 to both sides. We end up with a 5c equals 25, so c equals 5. Again, on number 6, we have a negative 8, so I would add 8 to both sides. I end up with a negative 5c because of that negative, right, that subtraction with that 5c. So it's a negative 5c. So this is c equals negative 5. So now as we come down here and look at some of these with distributive property, I just want to point out you do the exact same thing as you did on Monday, excuse me. We're going to take 3 times 5, which is 15, and then 3 times a negative n, which is a minus 3m, equals a negative 15. And then you're going to go ahead and solve it just like you did above. We draw the line down. We subtract 15 from both sides. So we bring down this negative 3m equals negative 30 divide by a negative 3. So m would equal a positive 10. As we look at letter B, it's got fractions. Negative 1/5 times x gives us a negative 1/5 x. And then negative 1/5 times a negative 10 is going to give us a positive 2. And that equals 1. So I can go ahead and subtract 2. So I have a negative 1/5 x equals negative 1. Now, if you remember, when you undo multiplying by a fraction, you have to multiply by the reciprocal. So I'm going to multiply by a negative 5 over 1 times negative 5 over 1. And so my x is equal to 5. So if I were to type that in my calculator to check it, here's what it's going to look like. We're going to type in a negative 1/5. And then we're going to put in our parentheses, just like we have here. We put the parentheses. X is 5, so we have 5 minus a 10, end parenthesis, and hit enter. And we get an answer of 1, so I know my answer is correct. You're going to want to always check those answers by typing it in the calculator. If there's parentheses in that original equation, make sure you use parentheses. So as I look at my practice now, this is what you need to start working on your own. You have 1 through 15, and then you've got this page also. You have 1 through 22 to complete for practice, and this will be due on Friday. So that's what I want you to go ahead and get started working on now. Make sure you're showing all of your steps nice and neat, and check each solution. All right, get to work.